This AskReddit user asks. 999 dispatch, what's the dumbest reason someone has called? People call us all the time because they are not from a rural area. And they think their two-wheel drive vehicle can go over our mountain roads. They get stuck. And somehow think because they are on federal ground that we are obligated to help them. We are not. Usually. These brainiacs who take their 1988 Accord over forest highways also don't bring anything warm to wear or any extra food either. When they do remember to bring something, it is usually a child that won't do well in the cold overnight. And when they get stuck and learn that AAA does not go 50 miles off of the pavement to come save you, they really start to panic. Either you have $3,000 for a private tow to maybe come get you. A long hike out. Or you are truly in danger and then maybe a search and rescue team will come out, at which point you may again receive a bill for their services. People. Just come a little bit prepared. Please. I love these calls. But only because the towers people hit from BFE are usually so outdated that they don't transmit Phase 2 data. So no lat long. I love figuring out where someone is when they can't tell you where they are. Pro tip. If they have enough service to call in, they can usually navigate to findmasar.com in their phone's web browser. I have used this a number of times. Have them put it on speaker. Go to that site. And have them push the button to switch format to whatever your CAD uses. Works great. I usually just walk them through accessing the lat long directly from their phone. We have a lot of areas in northern Nevada that will have spotty coverage, with little to no data. Great tip though. I've never heard of that website before. A guy called because an injured bear was in his front yard for a few hours. It was a giant landscaping boulder that had been there for years. I don't work in dispatch, but work in a big box retailer. Customers have to do the line outside. And once you leave, you can't come back in, as they're trying to limit the amount of people inside. Woman refused to do the line because it was long, and then told us she'd call 911. So we saved her the trouble and called 911 on her. My aunt worked on these in the 80s. She said a woman once called saying her gravy had gone cold. This is my favorite. Was she asking for help? Did she want a replacement gravy? Just needed to let someone know? Her logic was the gravy went cold too quickly, so there must be an issue with the kettle. My aunt said the fire brigade aren't going to come out and fix your kettle. Just buy a new kettle. Is putting gravy in a kettle normal where you're from? When they released our city's stupidest 911 calls a few years ago. This was one. There's a deer in my yard. A weekly occurrence here. What is it doing? It's looking at me. I am not a dispatcher, but I called when I was a kid because I was hungry. I'm sure I made that woman's day. When I was in college, my pa's not quite smartphone would BT dial 911 all the time. The dispatcher would call me back a minute later and ask if I was okay. I had to apologize a lot. Not a dispatch, but one time my parents were out on a date and I called the police because my brothers were pulling my hair. I guess on the phone I sounded like I was screaming, so the police showed up at my house just as my parents got home. I got in trouble. She got shampoo in her eye while showering. She rinsed it out, and her vision was unaffected. But it, really, stung for a minute. She was 27 and could not be talked out of having paramedics dispatched. When the medics got there, they couldn't talk her out of going to the hospital. She was fine, at least until she got word from her insurance company that they weren't going to pay for her frivolous and unnecessary ambulance ride. I was today years old when I learned that some people in the world dialed 999 for an emergency. And 000, and 112, and 111. I will never forget that brief period in early 2018 when KFC ran out of chicken and police in the UK received so many calls about it that they had to put out a notice asking people to stop. Little old lady would call every morning to ask what the weather was like outside. No matter how many times we told her to stop. A grown man wanted to press charges against someone who flipped him off while driving. What country uses 999? The UK. Nope. They changed it to 0118. 999. 88,199. 9,119. 725.3. Link. Thanks. There was a lion in the backyard, but they didn't realize it's a plush. That's reasonable-ish. I mean, if I saw a lion in the backyard, I wouldn't go check if it was stuffed or not. How big was it? Probably just about an arm's length, like most normal plushies from a toy store. IDK, I got my kid a life-sized plushie tiger thing once. I had a guy call 911 and wanted to report that a woman had stolen his money. We were swamped that night, so I kept him on the line trying to get further information. Upon asking a few more questions about the woman and her description, it was obvious he was describing a prostitute. He then began to cry and begged me to not judge him for hiring a prostitute. I promised him I wouldn't judge him and I would send him an officer as soon as we had one available. He hung up and I pended the call as the woman was no longer on scene. He called back on 911 less than a minute later and proceeded to want to talk about his hiring a prostitute until officers arrived. My partner and I continued to pick up his call after we had to place him on hold several times to take other 911 calls during the 15-minute period it took for officers to get to him. He ended up getting arrested for disorderly conduct that night as he was extremely intoxicated and decided he wanted to have a go at the officers when they arrived. Stolen flip-flops which were left outside the front door. To come to their third-floor apartment and change the TV channel. Somewhat innocuous, especially considering that the subject calling was quadriplegic. But 30 days and 150 calls with the same request later. It got pretty old. 150 calls in a month is nowhere near the record though. That record is owned by a local gentleman who called 217 times in a 4-hour period, rambling on about NI zombie violence, mayhem, wounds, and zircon ray technology. His phone was not GPS enabled, so we were never able to track him down. But at least when the NI zombie apocalypse comes, he will be proven right. But at least when the NI zombie apocalypse comes, he will be proven right. I think. Deep down. We all fear that day. Not dispatch but a firefighter. Once called to effect entry into a house for paramedics. The occupant, who a tippling way, had called them because, drum roll please, she couldn't close her curtains. Not me. But my parents. They were 911 dispatchers for 16 years. They frequently got calls from people who said there was a black person near their house on the sidewalk. Their reason was, they look suspicious. Quote, I get calls like this from time to time. But it was even worse in my last job. I worked security in a gated community for well-off senior citizens and we got calls like this all the time. Often. It was one of the landscapers, a caregiver, or even our own security officers. They were never doing anything more suspicious than what they did every day. Exactly. Doing nothing suspicious at all. That's how they trick ya. Make you comfortable by doing their job for years and then they steal $20 from your purse. The long con. Not a dispatcher, but a dumb caller. Granted, I was about 7 years old at this time though. A little background. My parents both worked and my mom worked early evening to about 11 to 12 at night and my dad got home about 6 p.m. then. So there was about a 2 to 3 hour gap where it was just me and my much older siblings. 8+ years. At home. Well, one of these days my brothers were in charge of getting dinner going because dad was going to be later than normal. Having 2 teenage boys in charge of dinner was my parents' mistake. However, my brothers thinking I had no authority or power over them was another mistake. They refused to make any food. I was 7 and had no idea how to make anything other than a horrible mixture of uncooked pinto beans, flour, and chocolate syrup, and I was begging for them to cook. Still nada. In their defense, Super Mario Sunshine is a really good game, and as an adult I can now understand the predicament they were in. Addictive stuff. Anywho, my ornery, impatient BT gets the bright idea of calling 911 for help. Great plan, right? They'll bring food for me and all will be good. Well, for some reason as soon as the dispatcher picks up, I freeze. The only thing they hear is a little girl shakingly say, "Sorry," right before hanging up. As their protocol demands, we had 3 police officers show up banging on our front and back door. My brothers ended up answering the door in only boxers and blankets wrapped around them. All was fine in the end and nobody got in trouble, and I finally got my dinner. It was a stupid reason to call, but resulted in a hilarious story. Not dispatch, but I used to field emergency court in the UK. Emergency court is more or less 24-hour walk-in. It's strictly for cases that can't wait to be heard in regular court: deportation, life support, emergency custody. Serious stuff. That did not dissuade some dude from turning up and demanding that we stop his neighbor's cat from trespassing on his land though. He ended up being fined later for repeatedly calling 999 over it. Not a dispatcher. But I'm curious. Do people really call about accidentally getting ST stuck up their ass? Nah. They show up in the emergency room, accident and emergency. Then they claim they fell and landed just right. So the dildo, light bulb, soda bottle, Barbie, cucumber, shampoo bottle, etc. got stuck up their prison pocket. It happened to me once when I fell on a warthog. I believe you. Have a seat. Lay on your belly in room 4. A wildlife ranger will be right in. For a woman shouting in a dialect we didn't know. Weird enough. 2 POs went to the house. Ends up that they were living in that council house illegally. They got kicked out. So a complaint about something minor AF ended up kicking out the rude lady karma if I've ever seen it. That Hillary lost the 2016 election. Given how it turned out, that was probably justified. My paramedic friend was called out to someone with a hangover. That happens daily. I mean, hangovers can be pretty emergent. Lol. Fireball gets me every time. The first and last time I drank tequila I thought I was going to find out if you could actually die from a hangover. Turns out it only feels like it. I was doing IT work at a dispatch center when a 911 call came in from a woman who said that she came home and heard a burglar upstairs. This was in a small town that doesn't get much crime. The town sent 5 of their own cops, plus they requested mutual aid from 2 neighboring towns. A total of about 10 officers cordoned off the area and set up a perimeter. Cops went into the house looking for the burglar. They found that the noise was caused by a Roomba that got trapped in a closet. The vacuum was banging against the walls and the closet door trying to escape. No arrests were made that day. Fortunately, no one was injured either. I need someone to help me take the lasagna out of the oven. I have no mitts. I had a woman call and tell me a UFO had landed in her driveway. I was a little taken aback, so I asked her to describe it while I dispatched officers using her exact wording. Of course officers scoffed but still went en route. She said there was a silver metallic object that came out of the sky and landed in her drive. Officers arrived on scene and there was a silver metallic object in her driveway. It was dark out at this time, so they approached it and found it to be a weather balloon. So it could actually be classed as a UFO. It had instructions on how to return it, so officers returned it a few days later. I imagine that happens fairly often. Was this woman hysterical or pretty chill? I'd say she was more excited than anything. She was able to answer questions but laughed a lot and repeatedly said, "I know this sounds crazy. This sounds like a good time." I was at a friend's house when his techie neighbor accidentally crash-landed a small experimental drone in his backyard. It didn't look like a drone as we know. This thing was shiny and looked like the classic UFO design. We were laughing hysterically at the thought of 5-inch aliens trying to invade Earth. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel for more videos.